And that brings me to one of my favourite sayings: practice doesn't make perfect, but it does make progress. So the more we practice, and that's practicing mentally, practicing understanding and thinking about the theoretical aspect of our work, but obviously also practicing our mechanics, our skill set, and our ability to think about the theory and make it work in the best way possible in the real world is where we're at. Now, this is a question that we hear all the time, and the answer, but there are lots of different ways to train dogs. There's not just one way. Why should you be so egotistical to think that there's just one way and your way is the highway? Is a question that I see a lot, I hear a lot. And the answer basically is yes, there's lots of different ways to train a dog, but the answer is also no. And that confusion comes from the fact that there really is only one way, or one way that science gives us that we can influence behaviour. And we're going to talk about that in a minute. But one of the things that we see, especially with so much opportunity on the internet for everybody to be an expert and everybody to have opinions, is a lot of different methods, unique methods, one-of-a-kind methods out there. Things like, or methods like the alpha dog or the dominance method, the compulsion method, balance training. These are all different training methods that I've heard. Positive reinforcement, there's clicker training, the scientific training method, the electronic training method, model rival technique or the mirror training method, and then there's relation-based training. All of these are different kinds of training styles or training methods that are out there. And one of the things that is quite interesting to me as a dog trainer who has also had the opportunity to work other species is that you don't see this huge variety. There's no one near you, Quinny? You don't see this huge variety of different training methods when you are in the world of exotic or non-domestic, even though a pig is, species. So pig trainers, and there are such things, and cat trainers, and yes, there are such things, and I guess in different times I've been both of those as well as a dog trainer, but you don't see the same kind of confusion or arguments battered around. You just train. And the bottom line is that regardless of whether you've got a pig, a dog, or a cat, or a goldfish, or a walrus, or actually another human being in front of you, the one science that deals with the scientific study of behaviour is what all of these different methods are based on. And the different methods basically will focus to a greater or lesser degree on one of these, what we call quadrants. So there's lots of different methods for training dogs, and by that we mean that there's lots of different ways that the science can be applied. Each method is going to generally focus on one or four of these quadrants. And quadrants, it's just a fancy sort of scientific name, one of the four different outcomes that the science of operant conditioning has been able to identify that has an influence on future behaviour. And we'll talk about that just a little bit more in a minute. I know many of you have a very good understanding of this aspect of the science already. And it might be called something spiffy or unique, like model rival technique or the mirror training method. But bottom line, each one of those different training methods comes from a specific way of applying and focusing on, to some degree, each of these four quadrants. And once you understand that, you can much more easily sit back and compare all of these different methods, and why people are going to give them fancy names and refer to them as unique and, make them special. All of the methods are an application of this basic science. So understanding the science, the foundation of all of these methods, gives you so much more power to understand the way that a method, or why a method works. It's really, really such a valuable thing for us all to have a good understanding, at least a basic understanding, or to know where to go to get more information about the science. That yes, I very much spent a lot of time, way too much time, on the quadrants of operant conditioning, and basically quadrants are just different kinds of consequences, and it's these that are the building blocks to different training methods. But they all come from the science of operant behavior, and we know that the different consequences have a different effect on future behavior. Reinforcement grows behavior, punishment kills behavior, or makes it die. And the different consequences also have different side effects. And when we talk about training, generally, whenever I'm sort of at I've got the microphone, you know that I'm going to be focused on the reinforcement aspect. That's my main focus. It's not to say that I won't delve into punishment where I need to, and use negative reinforcement, because sometimes that's all that I have on offer, especially with exotic animals. But my focus is on making sure that my training is effective, it's really efficient, and it's ethical. And wherever I can, I want the animal to be in a position where he'd say, yes, I choose to train with you. But it's those it's those side effects of the consequences that that a lot of us focus on, and are uncomfortable, and why we're uncomfortable about using punitive, aversive techniques. We know that we're focusing on behaviour and behavioural outcome, but we also know, we believe at least, that the dog has an emotional state, and those emotional states are created through the way that we train, how they feel about certain things, ourselves, the training process itself is influenced by the consequences that we use. Now, operant conditioning and classical conditioning are two types of ways that we learn that will be the underpinning for our learning and what we do for as long as we're training animals. And really, it is like gravity, operant conditioning and classical conditioning. We're always learning, we're always having the environment, as we'll see in a minute, affect the way that we behave, and it's these rules, or these laws, these principles that form the cornerstone, or the foundation of operant conditioning. And what has come to be known as applied behavior analysis, or it's also been called behaviorism. And it has certainly had a bad rap in the past, largely, I must admit, by people who don't really understand what Skinner, who's pictured here, who was, people say, is the founder of operant conditioning. He was the one that discovered the laws with the help of a hell of a lot of pigeons and a hell of a lot of rats. But these laws are what underpin all of the work that we do with our animals. The important thing to also remember is that all scientific research is always evolving and self-correcting. We grow, and our ability to use technology expands, which gives us different ways to look at things. Back in Skinner's day, in the 1940s, when he was doing all this research, there was no way that he could look into a brain. But nowadays, we know we've got a lot more opportunity because of the technology that we've got to see inner workings of the brain. We still have to interpret what's going on, and interpretation of different brain pictures, I guess, and different things is very much there's a vastly different and very conflicting differences of opinion. But fact is, we can now see some of the workings of an animal's or even a human's brain as the behavior or as the learning is going on in the real world. So he didn't have that. All he had was behavior and behavior change. Nowadays, since the 1940s, there's lots of different kinds of behaviorism, and it really comes down to that certain scientists will think a certain way, and then those that think a certain way, those that agree and study behaviorism will study and focus on different aspects of it until they get down to the nitty-gritty. We don't need to understand that. It's interesting, but we don't certainly need to understand that. We've got all that we need just in the basic principles of operant conditioning. And the main thing that we get from science is that it helps us understand the relationship between the environment and behavior. And that really is the crux of the matter. If you want to be a good trainer, then you need to know what's going on in terms of the influence that the environment, that's the immediate environment, has on the current behavior of the dog and the future behavior of the dog. And obviously, it's not just dogs. This is a situation where, just like the law of gravity, the laws of behavior change affect us all. And it's one of the reasons that, or the main reason, that I've been able to turn my hand to all of these three animals: Mitchie, the Californian sea lion, dear Harry Harris, when he was a baby, my third boxer, and Slammer, the black-breasted buzzard. They're three very different species, but three individuals that are on this planet and are behaviors on this planet, and so their behavior is influenced by the principles that we're going to talk about just quickly.